Just another reminder, if you don't want to be on our YouTube channel tomorrow, to please turn your camera off now. And I'm in Toronto and we are having a very big thunderstorm right now. So if you hear any loud thunderclaps while I'm speaking, apologies, but we've got quite a big storm happening behind me. And on that note, I would like to welcome everyone tonight and thank you for joining. My name is Ruth Kapelis. I'm the National Content and Media Relations here at Breakthrough T1D. And we're very excited to present you with more information tonight on the latest in cell therapy research and Project ACT, Breakthrough T1D's global plan to make reality these cell therapies, for people living with type 1 diabetes. If you're familiar with Breakthrough T1D, welcome back. If this is your first time, we are a global leader working towards a world free from type 1 diabetes through research, funding, and advocacy. We support people and families in the T1D community from the time of diagnosis by helping those living with T1D to have better, healthier, and safer lives while we work to find cures. We support anyone with T1D at any stage or any age, including the often underrepresented adult community. Before we begin our formal presentation tonight, as visitors on this land, we would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that Breakthrough T1D's head office is located here in the city of Toronto, historically known as Takaranto, covered by Treaties 13 and the Williams Treaties. And today we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Breakthrough T1D's research and activities take place across the land where many other Indigenous inhabitants live. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples who call this land home. We are grateful to come together today as a community and share these lands as we support each other and work towards a world free from T1D. The education series offers information on a new topic approximately every other month or every month. Our next event will be taking place on April 29th and will be on GKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, and ketones and their impact on diabetes management. We also host a virtual connection series on the fourth Wednesday of each month. This is an unstructured opportunity to connect with others with no formal programming. And our next connection series will be taking place on Wednesday, April 26th at 12 p.m. in the Pacific and 7 p.m. if you're in the Eastern time zone. Just a reminder again that we're a big group, so to please minimize background noise and keep your microphone on mute. We will be posting this recording tomorrow to our YouTube channel, and we'll be emailing out to everyone who registered. There is a raise hand button if you need clarification during the presentation, but we have a chat function as well, and we encourage any questions to be commented on in that chat. We will try to get them to them tonight, time permitted. And on that note, let's begin tonight. Cell therapies have the potential to provide insulin independence for people with T1D. They involve replacing the glucose sensing, insulin producing cells that are destroyed in people with type 1 diabetes. By investing in science and aligning efforts across our global network, Breakthrough T1D is accelerating the path to these therapies for the people who need them. Developing effective therapies is only one piece of the puzzle. Systems must also be ready to evaluate, approve, and deliver these treatments equitably. That's why Breakthrough T1D has launched Project ACT, a coordinated worldwide effort to speed the development, approval, and adoption of cell therapy treatments for T1D. And we're really excited to share more with you about this plan to make these therapies a reality for Canadians with T1D. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Sarah Linklater. Dr. Linklater is Chief Scientific Officer here at Breakthrough T1D Canada, where she oversees the organization's research activities, mental health programs, and medical affairs. Sarah originally trained as a scientist and holds a PhD in experimental medicine from the University of British Columbia. Prior to joining Breakthrough T1D Canada in 2019, Sarah spent several years working in science communications with biomedical journals in the United Kingdom. We're very excited to have her presenting tonight on Project ACT. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Ruth. And hello, everyone. It's great to have this big group here to talk about cell therapies and Project ACT and how we're working globally to accelerate the development of transformative cell therapies for people with type 1 diabetes. So I hope you can see my slides. I'm going to start by just quickly reviewing what we're going to cover this evening. And first talking about our paths to T1D cures. So as Ruth mentioned, if you know us well, you'll know that we are a global organization of 6 affiliates worldwide, including here in Canada. And we work together to improve the quality of life of people with type 1 diabetes while seeking ways to delay, prevent, and ultimately cure the disease. And we fulfill this mission by funding research, advocating with and for the T1D community, and supporting various community engagement programs and supports. On the slide up now, what you're seeing is our global research strategy. We have always been and remain focused primarily on finding cures for the disease. And this includes work to detect T1D as early as possible. It involves research into disease-modifying therapies that get at the root cause of type 1 diabetes, and it involves research on cell therapies, which is our topic this evening. We also continue to support research on what we call improving lives. So this is research on technologies, so various diabetes devices, and also treatments, which includes better insulins, adjunct therapies taken alongside insulin, mental health, and complications. But those are topics for another time. So to put the topic of cell therapies into context, we just wanted to briefly review the natural history of T1D. So as you may know, type 1 diabetes progresses through several stages. Stage 1 is characterized by the appearance of autoantibodies. Something happens, mostly for unknown reasons, that trigger the beginning of autoimmunity. And at this stage, autoantibodies in the blood tell us that the pancreas is under attack. In stage 2 type 1 diabetes, those autoantibodies persist, and we also see the first signs that glucose is beginning to become dysregulated. This is an ideal stage to intervene with disease-modifying therapies, even though there are no clinical symptoms. Most people are diagnosed with what we now call stage 3 type 1 diabetes, and this is characterized by high blood sugar, symptoms of diabetes, and the need for insulin therapy. And we're really at a pivotal moment in history. Thanks to screening programs, it's now possible to identify people with stage 1 or stage 2 type 1 diabetes and try to intervene with disease-modifying therapies that can prevent the onset of stage 3 or delay at least. Ultimately, we want to prevent. And we hope to see major advances in this area in the coming years. But today, most of our discussion is going to focus on cell therapies, which are for people that have what we now call stage 4 type 1 diabetes. And these are people who would have had type 1 diabetes usually for many years, and they would have very few insulin producing beta cells remaining. So there aren't really any of their own beta cells to protect or encourage them to regrow. So really it's all about replacing the insulin producing cells that they need to come off insulin therapy and help them with things like hypoglycemia, which are so debilitating. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the state of the science here and what are cell therapies. So cell therapies are about replacing insulin producing cells back into the body to provide a functional cure through insulin independence. And the first cell therapy is clinically available today, and that is an islet transplant. And these have been clinically available in Canada in selected sites, mainly in Alberta, since around 2000 when the Edmonton Protocol was developed by a team there. And what that involves is a deceased donor pancreas, and the islets, which contain insulin-producing beta cells, are isolated and reinfused into a recipient with type 1 diabetes into the portal vein of the liver. Those cells take up residence and begin to produce insulin. And so this has been done in Canada in far more patients than in any other country than, in the world. So this sounds like a really great solution, but it is far from perfect for many different reasons. So first of all, several donor pancreases are usually needed to provide enough islets to treat one person. So this is not a scalable solution to treat type 1 diabetes, as there will never be enough donor organs to treat everyone that would like this treatment. And in addition, like any other organ transplant, this needs to be given alongside immunosuppression to prevent the cells from getting rejected by the body. And these immunosuppressive drugs can have some serious side effects, especially when they're taken long term, and they do need to be taken for life. Because of these risks of immunosuppression, it means that islet transplantation and the cell therapies that are emerging are really limited to people with really unstable blood sugar and severe recurrent hypoglycemia. So this is just a very small proportion of the T1D population. And we need safer solutions so that more people with type 1 diabetes can be eligible for these therapies. And finally, an islet transplant is usually not a one-time procedure. Most people that undergo an islet transplant would need to be retreated, so it's not necessarily a durable solution. So still lots of challenges to make this type of treatment available to more people. And on the back of that, there are many opportunities. So one is to use a different source for cell therapies. As I mentioned, deceased donors are in limited supply, thankfully. So the option is to use stem cells as a source of cells to create manufactured islets. And this is because stem cells are self-renewing and therefore provide a limitless starting material to generate islets in the lab. And this is now possible, and well-established recipes exist for doing this. A second opportunity is to provide better ways to protect the cells from rejection. So we need to reduce the immunosuppression that's required, use smarter or more targeted immunosuppression that has less side effects, or even totally eliminate immunosuppression by adapting the cells with gene editing so that they can exist under the radar. And finally, there are other opportunities to improve the safety, survival, and function of transplanted cells using a number of different approaches to make these longer lasting and more efficient. So we are funding research in all of these areas across Canada. We're funding over 70 grants in total, and the majority of these are in the area of cell therapies. Right now, our multi-year investment in this area is over 33 million Canadian, and we've just highlighted a few of the leaders and what they're working on here. At our Breakthrough T1D Connects for Kids Fund Center of Excellence at UBC in Vancouver. This is a multi-project initiative that has a major focus on creating better cell therapies and immune protection strategies to make them most effective. Part of this team and a person that also holds separate grants is Timothy Kiefer, and he is working to create kind of designer islet cells for transplant. Greg Corbett at the University of Alberta is developing biological scaffolds and other strategies to help transplanted islets survive best after transplantation. Christina Nostra at University Health Network in Toronto is working to make islets that can evade the immune system and therefore be delivered without immunosuppression. And finally, Corinne Heisley at McGill University in Montreal is developing novel encapsulation mechanisms to contain islets so that they are going to function well and also be protected when they're put into the body. So really tackling all of these different challenges from different angles at different places across Canada. So it's important to note that cell therapy activities in Canada extend way beyond academia. Many companies are active in this space, and Breakthrough T1D is either funding, partnering with, or collaborating with all of them in some way. So key Canadian companies to be aware of are Cernova, that's based in London, Ontario, and they are developing a cell pouch, a way of encapsulating islets in people, and they're running clinical trials now that look very promising. Aspect Biosystem is a Vancouver-based biotechnology company that is using 3D bioprinting to create islet products in collaboration with Novo Nordisk, and they are working towards clinical trials. And Alarda Life Science, I believe in Hamilton, is working on a totally different way of encapsulating islets for future clinical trials. U.S. companies that are active in Canada are listed along the bottom of this slide. Vertex Pharmaceuticals has some of the most advanced results and trials. They are working with a stem cell-based product with immunosuppression. And Cellen is working with a novel encapsulation device, and they've recently finished some clinical studies in Canada, and CRISPR Therapeutics is working with gene-edited cells that are delivered without immunosuppression, again with some early but promising results. In the next couple of slides, we kind of walk you through a timeline of what's been happening in the past 30 years. So the first islet transplants were attempted around 1980. These were not super successful, and so they tried again in 1990, and these did not last. So there was more work to be done, and it was in 1999 that the group in Edmonton first developed a successful protocol to make this a durable, lasting procedure. And this was published in the year 2000 with the support of Breakthrough T1D and other funders. And then the pace began to pick up. So on the next slide, we've illustrated the last sort of 15 or so years, and you can see that there has just been an avalanche of progress and an increasing investment of companies in this space. So really moving from academia to commercial investment. And we're now well beyond the proof of concept stage with several trials being well advanced. So and then here on this slide, there are just a selection of trials that have some sort of presence or in Canada. And just to indicate that Vertex, again, is most advanced in its clinical trial program, but others are quickly advancing as well. So lots of exciting news to come. So now on to Project ACT. So Project ACT stands for Accelerate Cell Therapy, and this is a coordinated worldwide initiative that is aiming to dramatically speed the development, approval, and adoption of these treatments for people with T1D. So in 2024, this initiative was launched by our international partners, and we sort of saw the momentum that was building here and the need for global coordination to ensure rapid access. So that's what led us to launch this umbrella initiative to bring together all of this work happening. And so after several decades of investing in research here, we really want to invest in the other areas that are needed. So regulatory, clinical adoption, health policy, and other things that need addressing so that we can get these therapies over the finish line. So some key things to recap some of the things I've already mentioned. Manufactured islets are getting people off insulin in clinical trials. And industry is investing more and more in this area and is getting close to regulatory submissions of the first products. In Canada, we may see these as early as 2028. So that's really just around the corner. And as we are engaging with all the stakeholders in this area, we are uniquely positioned to accelerate therapies, including immunosuppression-free versions, which are really the ultimate goal. And we are convener of researchers, clinicians, regulators, industry, and the community in this work. So first, we wanted to highlight some of the international activities under Project ACT, and this slide sort of illustrates some of the work we've been doing to push cell therapies through the pipeline, way beyond research. So in the area of research, some things to highlight are that we continue to convene what's called the Beta Cell Replacement Consortium. We've been convening this for well over a decade, and this brings together all of our funded researchers and industry partners twice a year to share successes and challenges, and we reduce duplication, encourage collaboration, and new partnerships as well. So this continues to be a really important mechanism for us in the research realm. Of our centers of excellence, of which there are 5 active right now, 4, most of these do have a focus on cell therapies, and these, like our center in Vancouver, are real hubs where this is the focus and the research is moving really quickly. We've also recently launched what we call beta cell factories. So these are partnerships and initiatives that allow scale up of research grade and hopefully soon clinical grade cells so that we can move more quickly with the research and early testing. Here over on the right of this slide are some of these other activities that are important in the area of regulatory approval, therapy coverage, and adoption. And a lot of this is focused on convening different experts, writing position papers and policy briefs, and some of the examples are given here. And the newest one, which is really about identifying what matters most to people with living with T1D. This one here, adults with T1D, define what matters to them in stem cell-derived islet therapy. So we are trying to ensure that these desires are at the forefront of these developments. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Canada. So to bring Project ACT, which is a global initiative, to bring it to life in Canada, we've developed something that we call the Canadian Cell Therapy Roadmap. And this is really our action plan in Canada for Project ACT, engaging Canadian stakeholders and focused on Canadian systems. And so the domains of our Canadian cell therapy roadmap mirror those of Project ACT. They're the same. And the activities in each of these domains are really designed with the intention to synergize with global activities. So we know that by sharing information and strategies and bringing stakeholders together across borders, we can move more quickly and share learnings. So like Project ACT, the roadmap recognizes that beyond funding discovery research, we must ensure that we work in these other domains. So research and development, clinical studies, that's where we've been focused in the past. Now we're increasing our focus to engage with regulators to de-risk and modernize how these cell therapies are considered and approved, working to advocate to ensure that there's maximal coverage of cell therapies once approved. We need to kind of lay the groundwork well before those approvals come. And finally, adoption. We need to make sure that systems and healthcare providers are ready for these therapies and able to identify patients to receive them and support them in their care. So on this slide, we've kind of outlined in a little bit more detail those 5 work streams and some of the key stops along the path to getting where we want to go. And while Breakthrough T1D won't act at every stop along that pathway, we've sort of worked out where we can have the greatest impact and therefore where we need to focus our resources and our efforts. So that's what this indicates. And this is on our website. I know I'm going quite quickly, but if you'd like to have a little bit of a closer look, it is there for you to look at. So what have we done so far with respect to our cell therapy roadmap? Last year, we did a lot. We had a busy year in this area. We funded 12 new cell therapy projects in Canada with a total investment of 6.7 million Canadian. That was net new. We expanded our partnership with a key ally in this space, Canada's Stem Cell Network, who funds regenerative medicine across the spectrum. And I'll just take a little tangent here and mention that regenerative medicine is, of course, relevant for lots of different diseases, but T1D is at the forefront. It may be the first, or certainly among the first diseases where we see an approval and have to decide how we can deliver and potentially manufacture these therapies. So that's why type 1 diabetes kind of is the use case, is blazing a trail for these types of therapies. So the Stem Cell Network is a great ally in this space, and we have really evolved our partnership with them. Together with the Stem Cell Network and Shift Health, we convened key interest holders at a workshop in Ottawa last June, and we focused there on regulatory and access issues that we know are going to be key. We also we launched a burden of disease study to get better information about T1D data in Canada so that we can build a more compelling case for the coverage of these therapies when the time comes. And we also talked with our community through surveys to assess awareness and learning needs so that we can prepare you, our community, better for these therapies as they emerge. This year, we have lots of priorities in this space. We're going to support new projects in cell therapies and continue to support our ongoing projects. We're continuing to engage with industry and other ecosystem partners in this space. We're working to accelerate recruitment to clinical trials through a number of different strategies, including our clinical trials finder, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We're engaging with Health Canada to de-risk and modernize regulatory pathways for cell and gene therapies. And we're beginning to develop some education for healthcare providers about these therapies. And finally, we're going to continue to support training of future researchers and clinicians because that next generation will be who needs to be ready to deliver these therapies when they arrive. So this is bringing me close to the close of our presentation. I think it's safe to say it's a matter of when, not if, T1D cell therapies reach people with T1D. And it's important to highlight that cell therapies are already helping people in clinical trials reduce or eliminate insulin therapy. And when it comes to islet transplant, hundreds of people in Canada have received an islet transplant and have had at least a period being insulin free. The next generation of T1D cell therapies will be more safe, scalable, and accessible. And bringing this all together, Project ACT is focused on translating breakthroughs into real-world impact faster. And we didn't talk too much about this, but Canada is truly a leader in this field based on many things. Stem cells were discovered in Canada long ago. We have a long diabetes legacy, of course, starting more than 100 years ago with the discovery of insulin. The Edmonton Protocol was based here. And we have a lot of other reasons that we are such a leader in this field. So I think we have a lot to be proud of and a lot to look forward to. So how can you get involved if that's of interest to you? Please consider advancing the research, consider participating in or just spreading the word about clinical trials. We've included a link there for our clinical trials finder that will show you trials across Canada, but you can also filter by region and a number of other different things. You can help us advance the cause. We will be advocating to the federal government this spring for more research into cell therapies and to ensure that the community will have access to them when they're approved. You can find out more by watching an upcoming webinar called How Parliamentarians Can Change the Future of T1D. We will be sharing the link for this in the next month. And then you can also join us to advocate for T1D cell therapies at the link here. I think that's all I had today. And now I think there's a lot of questions flying in the chat. So let's dive in. And please also feel free to raise your hand if you wish to answer a verbal question.
That was just what I was about to say, Sarah. And thank you so much, as always, for your very informative presentation, but delivered in such an accessible way. Laura's been in the chat answering some questions as well. Laura, do you want to turn your camera on and unmute your mic and introduce yourself a bit more formally? You here?
Laura, maybe camera off.
Okay.
I don't
maybe
mind. I'm saying a quick hello, but I am juggling child bedtime, so I'll let Sarah continue.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura, for tuning in and multitasking. I can start from the top with the questions. So one member, Kimberly, thank you so much for your question. Stem cells from an individual, are these being used with any success? This is a great question. That would be what we'd call an autologous approach. So research has shown us now that it's possible to take even a blood sample, convert those cells into stem cells, and then use those as a starting ingredient to manufacture islets. And the goal would be then to use those islets to replace in someone with T1D. In theory, then, you wouldn't have the graft rejection response, but you may have recurrent autoimmunity. So this is much earlier stage research, but it's something we're actively supporting by James Shapiro, and it's also being tested in some other countries, but we have limited data so far. Okay.
There was a question about Eladon, and I won't attempt to pronounce the name of the immunosuppressant drug because I never do a very good job with that, which Laura answered. If you wanted to expand a bit on that as well, Sarah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't see what Laura answered, so I'm sorry if I repeat a little bit. Tegoprubart is a novel immunosuppression that acts in a different way than conventional immunosuppression. It seems to have much less side effects. And so far I'm just going to take off the slides.
Oh, Did we have we lost Sarah? Is she frozen?
Like a beta cell.
She's frozen.
She is frozen. Okay.
I'm
Laura,
happy to jump in. Yeah, I can
thanks.
jump in.
Thanks.
Everyone, yeah, apologies. So as Sarah was saying, tegoprubart is a new type of immunosuppression, in that it is less sort of aggressive than some other standard immunosuppressions that are currently used in organ transplants and the Edmonton protocol, which we kind of refer to as the gold standard of islet transplantation. So far, the islet cells appear to be very functional. They are working well, but it is still early days. So I think what needs to be determined is, although tegoprubart appears to be protecting the cells with less side effects right now, is it still going to protect the cells in the long term? So this is where we generally want to see some longer term data, but it's very promising so far. And to note, this drug has been used in kidney. Is in clinical trials and has been tested for a little while in kidney transplant as well. So it's nice that there's some other evidence there.
I was going to say, Anne was asking about her teenage son being involved in clinical studies. Any suggestions for this? We've registered with a few projects to volunteer, but nothing has worked out yet.
Yeah, it's really tricky to find a study that is available for teens and then maybe is in your area and that your teen maybe fits the profile for. So although it can be a little bit disheartening to see that there's nothing available at the moment, my suggestion is just to keep an eye out on clinical trials. And the what personally, what I think would be the easiest way to do that is we actually have a clinical trial finder tool. And if you just sign up for alerts, then anytime that there's a new trial in Canada, you're going to get an email saying there's a new trial in Canada. Are you eligible? And we list our eligibility criteria right up front. For teens, you could also, if you're just interested in looking for your teen, you could also set a filter so that you only receive trial information. It would be for all pediatrics, but that would include teens. So that way you're not also getting information about adult trials that unfortunately your teen probably wouldn't be eligible for.
We have a question from Brent. If it were possible to reprogram the immune system to ignore the islet cells, would a patient's own cells regenerate, or will transplanted manufactured cells always be necessary? That's a great question.
That's a really great question. So unfortunately, no. Beta cells do not regenerate on their own. They are not a lot of human cells regenerate fully on their own, but it's specifically not a functional cell like a beta cell. So no, we do have some research ongoing to see if there are different drugs that can be given to sort of trigger an existing beta cell into regenerating. But at this moment, no, it always transplanted or manufactured cells will always be necessary, especially for people with long-standing type 1. Again, the regeneration would still be aiming for somebody who's a little bit more newly diagnosed, who probably still has a bit of a critical mass of beta cells there.
And there were a couple questions. I know you've been asked this before, Laura, about blood banking and umbilical fluid.
Yeah, so the umbilical cord blood is actually not an ideal type of cell to use for something like this. While it's very rich in stem cells, these are hematopoietic stem cells, which basically means they're blood-based. So that's why umbilical cord blood could be really critical for somebody who has like leukemia, something that is bone marrow and blood-based disorder. Unfortunately, type 1 diabetes is a beta, an insulin producing beta cell in the pancreas, which is why it's not beneficial. There have been a number of studies looking at various ways of using umbilical cord blood, such as giving umbilical cord blood from a healthy individual to a newly diagnosed type 1. There's been some twin studies with umbilical cord blood, and basically there's just not much of a result coming from umbilical cord blood, probably because of the type of stem cells that those are. So we often use, I should say, we often use the term stem cell kind of to mean interchangeably one cell when in fact there are lots of types of stem cells, and maybe that's one of the reasons that it's hard to explain that umbilical cord cells are a different type of cell.
So Brina was asking, most of the trials are for people with severe frequent hypos or hypoglycemic unawareness. And do we know when the trials are going to be open up to people who don't have those features?
That's a fantastic question. It's certainly a question that we get a lot, that is top of mind for people, and that we also ask. So we don't know for sure, but our goal obviously is to work towards the eligibility increasing as much as possible for these trials. That being said, especially in a novel therapy with immunosuppression, which should not be taken lightly, you really want to have the risk benefit balance way towards the benefit side. And so for someone who's longstanding type 1, but is very well managed, has minimal signs of complications, is not having severe frequent hypos, then adding immunosuppression to their life is not at the moment considered to be worth the risk. What is difficult here, and I completely understand it, is that this is sort of making a blanket decision for the population, but that is the role of regulatory agencies such as Health Canada and the FDA. It is to kind of decide what is an acceptable risk-benefit threshold and limit that. As we get more and more evidence on the safety profile of these, we will start to see the eligibility criteria open up, but I wouldn't want to comment on the amount of time that that's going to take.
Sharon, I can see you have a couple questions about school systems and pumps versus multiple daily injections. I will try to get to those. I'm just going to try to push those to the end while we just get through the cell therapy questions first. So I'm not ignoring them. We're just going to try to get to them after we answer some of the ones related specifically to the topic while we have Laura here. Ian has a few questions within his question, but they're all really good ones because we do speak about accessibility rather broadly when it comes to making cell therapies a reality for Canadians. So can we define what is meant by accessible and to who? And will it be people who only meet specific criteria or have the means to pay for it? Like, what realistically does accessible mean when we're talking about these therapies for Canadians?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, our goal would be that anybody who wants these therapies can get them at minimal to no cost, or at least an equitable low cost anywhere in Canada. That being said, we are dealing with sort of the logistics of a very large country that has a universal healthcare system, which is technically actually 13 different healthcare systems. So what accessible means to us is that nobody has to travel extremely far to, only one location in the country to get these therapies, or certainly to a different country. Sorry. It means that they are at low cost. This is where we will advocate for reimbursement from the government, for example, or at no cost would be the ideal. I noticed everyone who wants access, certainly this is going to be a personal health choice. We don't believe that every single person with longstanding T1D is going to opt to get cell therapies, and that's completely fine. So yes, it is about who desires to have access. And what our goal also is that these procedures get to the point that it is not an additional burden, financial or otherwise, to go get the procedures, but also that we have healthcare providers all across the country that then know how to monitor people who have had islet transplants. Because you can imagine that, your endos have been working for many, many years managing people with type 1 on different devices, on MDIs, things like that. But when they have people who now have islet transplants, it's a whole different way of monitoring. Sarah, glad to see you're back.
And
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Technology never likes to be cooperative. Kevin was asking if we can provide a bit more detail on the potential 2028 regulatory submission of islet product. What is it and how does it work? Just on a high level and not getting too much in the weeds of it.
I feel like we can't share too much detailed information. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to share. So I don't want to speak out of turn. So I think I shouldn't add any more detail. I'm so sorry. And I'm not sure when I lost you. I was talking for like 5 minutes.
Oh,
So
we didn't hear
lost you
anything.
right away.
oh gosh.
But Laura very ably jumped in as she always does. So we've been going very smoothly, but we're very glad to have you back. Graham was saying he's seen a lot of Americans fighting for the Islet Act. That was pretty publicized probably about a week and a half ago, I think. Changing the way the American Parliament views islet cells, helping with insurance funding, et cetera. Is this something that we should be concerned about as Canadians that may impact future Canadian insurance support?
Yeah, this is a great question and a kind of complex topic. So one thing to note is that Canada regulates islets for a transplant like an organ. They're not regulated like a drug. In the United States, islets are regulated like a drug. So the context is already very different. And the Islet Act is pushing for that situation in the US to change so that they're treated a little bit more like we treat the regulation of islets here. So I think the context is very different, and our engagement with Health Canada also looks quite different than how the US is engaging with the FDA. So right now we're not doing anything to advocate for change in how islets are regulated in Canada. I think that just kind of gets at the very tip of the question, but it's probably a longer conversation, but I hope that helps.
Stefan is asking, are there any cell therapies that will address other cell types affected by type 1? Is this being researched? Laura's nodding, so I think the answer to that is probably yes.
Sure. I think the question there is it just beta cells? And the answer is no. Most of the products are actually looking at replacing the whole islet cell, which is a combination of cell types. So you also have alpha cells and delta cells, and those are cells that help regulate glucagon levels and somatostatin levels. So it's kind of looking at, this is where we kind of call it like a organoid product, like a little, almost like a mini pancreas organ. It's looking at all the cell types of an islet, not just beta cells. Whereas in the timeline Sarah showed, those very early days in 2006 and 2014, they were only looking at beta cells that produce insulin. We've really come forward to islet cells that have a variety of cell types. And I think that's what the question was asking.
Fiona was asking if you are a type 1 who is already on immunosuppressants for renal failure, is this a disqualifier for being able to receive a cell therapy transplant?
So not necessarily, and in fact, it might mean that you are eligible for unique trials. I'm looking at Laura for validation here, but I believe one of the new Vertex trials is actually specifically recruiting people that already live with a kidney transplant, because in that case, they're already on immunosuppressants that look very similar to what you need in an islet transplant. So the risk-benefit ratio looks different for you as someone that is already on those drugs and needs to stay on those drugs for your kidney. So not necessarily, and in fact, it might increase your eligibility for certain trials.
But that's the Vertex trial? Hi, it's
Correct.
Fiona.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but they're not using that newer immunosuppressant that has.
No.
They're not. No. Are they using tacrolimus?
Yes, that tacrolimus is part of the regimen. Yes.
Okay, not such great news. Thanks.
George was asking if encapsulated islet cells or the cell pouch need immunosuppression, or will they be gene edited?
So it can be either. So encapsulation, we kind of rushed over this, but encapsulation can look very different depending on the technology. Some encapsulation is like an immunoprotective pouch, that doesn't allow blood and immune cells in or out, but does allow insulin and glucose in and out. Other types of encapsulation allow everything to diffuse in and out, and they really just contain the cells, so they are not immunoprotective. And then there's other types of encapsulation, which are microencapsulation, which are more like a gel that might protect the cells and keep them healthy and help them survive. So encapsulation is there's lots of different types. So in terms of how the cells are protected, it depends on the type of encapsulation and also where you put the cells. Some are in the skin, some are in the omentum. So there's a number of different factors that would affect what type of immune protection was tried.
Maria was just asking for some further clarification on what we mean when we say if someone desires stem cell therapy at a cost. Larry, I think that was what you were referring to earlier.
So what I was talking about is just that when we talk about access for everybody to have therapies, we're looking at both people, we're only looking at people who want therapies. Again, there might be some people who don't opt for cell therapies. So that's where the desire piece comes in. Some people would desire to have them and others not, and that's totally fine. But our goal is to have these be at no cost or at as low cost as absolutely possible. We'd like these to be reimbursed fully. So I think hopefully that clarifies what we were talking about there.
So sorry, Laura. So just to understand it, so you're saying that this is not something that's available other than through trials right now. Is that what you
Correct.
mean?
Yes.
You're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
At this point, it's only available through clinical trials. And with clinical trials, there is never a cost to the participant. But we're talking about, when we talk about accessible access, we're talking about when these are on the market. And at that point of them being on the market, we want as much reimbursement as possible. And that's something that we would advocate for, the same way that we advocate for as much pump coverage, insulin coverage, et cetera, so that people aren't having to pay out of pocket for expensive stem cell therapies.
Oh, okay, thank you. I understand. I also just wanted to just add one little caveat though to your trial criteria. You're saying there's people who go low and they have others, they're not basically in control. Then you have others who have been diabetic for like 31 years, for example, and they're doing their best to be under control. They're on a pump. So, but there's also a mental health factor in that I think you need to add into that criteria as well, because in this case, this person who's been using a pump for 31 years, his body is hard as a rock from the injection sites. So he shouldn't be excluded or punished because he's been doing his best to do it. He's basically out of body right now where to put these sites. So that was just another little thing to add in to think about.
We completely agree. I think it's really worth noting that we are not the ones that set the eligibility criteria for clinical trials, right? That's always set by the sponsor of the trials, typically the company doing, with the drugs such as Vertex, Eledon, but actually primarily they're working with Health Canada and the FDA to set those eligibility criteria. And what we help bring the patient perspective is by introducing other criteria that they might want to consider, such as someone who is living with type 1 for a long time and maybe has a mental health burden and is willing, right, feels like that's a good trade-off for immunosuppression. So that's sort of our role, is to continue to present different options other than just the physiological measurables in terms of figuring out those eligibility criteria. So thanks, Maria, for validating that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Peter also touched again on the Eledon trial and its popularity and press on social media, which I think is a good thing to address because it does feel to someone, and he mentioned this as well, that people who are participating on it are essentially cured. The quotes come from him. And that we realize we need to wait and see if it works for longer periods. Is there something we're missing, or is it really as exciting as it looks, or it's being presented in little snippets on social media that people are accessing?
I think it's important to remember this is in the context of islet transplant. So it's not a stem cell-based therapy. And a lot of people that receive a standard islet transplant with conventional immunosuppression do great, really great. They are also experiencing life without insulin therapy, free of hypoglycemia, the burden of daily management. So a lot of people might look quite similar to the Eledon trial. The good thing about the Eledon trial is that immunosuppression is brand new. It's not approved yet, so it's just experimental, and it looks really promising. And if the long-term side effects look a lot better than conventional immunosuppression, then yes, it might be very exciting because it could begin to replace what we now use as conventional immunosuppression. But like you say, it's just too early to tell. And what will be very interesting is in time, Eledon will probably try its immunosuppressive drug with stem cell-based therapies. And that will be very exciting because that's putting those two ingredients together, novel immunosuppression, novel cell product. Let's see what happens. So that will be exciting. We don't know when that's coming or who will do it, but that's something that we hope to see.
Laura, are there clinical trials for type 1 patients with frequent hyperglycemia and no hypoglycemia? Do we know?
Oh, that's a great question. At the moment, there's no cell therapy trials for that. Yeah, I think then you'd be looking at we're starting to see more adjunct therapy trials coming out, and that might be something that you'd fall into the eligibility criteria of an adjunct therapy. Those would be, without getting into it, maybe Ruth can pop a link in the chat for us. The adjunct therapies that we're looking at are GLP-1s. You may have heard the name Ozempic, SGLT2. So these are therapies that can help minimize glucose fluctuations, but also and have some protective effect on the heart and kidneys. But in terms of cell therapies for hyperglycemia, no, there are none. There are none available at this point in time.
Would having had cancer exclude someone from being eligible for a type 1 clinical trial?
I actually don't know.
I think this might be a case-by-case basis because it's probably going to be about what the cancer treatment was, how long ago that was. That's almost definitely going to be on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, I've never seen it be a full rule out, but it's really going to depend on the individual circumstances.
Brent's been asking fantastic questions tonight. Is the Faustman's lab in the United States research with the BCG vaccine actually promising? I don't understand the mechanism of action for this.
Thanks for the question, Brent. This was super exciting when the initial results came out several years ago. Breakthrough T1D supported a couple of studies that looked to reproduce the results and confirm that they were kind of real in others' hands. I think we supported 2 grants that worked to do this around the time that the results came out. And the results of those studies that they were not reproducible. And so at that point, Breakthrough T1D stopped funding that avenue of research because it didn't hold true in other labs, but that line of work is continuing. And I believe they're getting set to or are advancing into clinical trial. The mechanism would be about immunomodulation. So different field, not cell therapy, but still really interesting, I think. So it's still going, but Breakthrough T1D is not actively supporting.
I saw a question before, as Sarah said that, I saw a question before about other autoimmune diseases, and I think maybe that's sort of on this thought of cell therapies are typically very disease specific because you're reproducing a single cell, whereas immunotherapies, as Sarah just kind of touched on, can be a little bit more cross disease. So for example, psoriasis or autoimmune thyroid drugs are often used for type 1 diabetes as well. I think the Crohn's was mentioned because those are similar immune pathways, but cell therapies are quite disease specific.
So there were a couple questions about Santa. I put the most recent update in the chat because I don't think with 5 minutes left, we probably have time to really delve too deeply into that. There's been a few questions, obviously, about when do we think this is going to be reality for people in Canada. If you want to briefly touch on that, I know we cannot make any promises here, but any type of realistic time frame that we could touch on.
Yeah, that is really hard to say because we cannot predict how regulators will perceive these therapies once they submit their market authorization. We also don't know how high the hurdle is with respect to coverage. We're working as hard as we can to lay the groundwork and consider novel ways of seeking reimbursement for therapies like this because they look different than anything we have on the market now. So that's why we never want to give you a particular time frame. It doesn't seem fair. What we do know is that the first of these therapies will come, but they are also not going to be for everybody with T1D, even every adult with T1D. They're probably going to be for quite a small population of people that are really unwell with the disease, quite similar to the trials that are recruiting now, or people that receive an islet transplant. So in the longer term, safer, more scalable, and next generation therapies will be available to more and more people, but it's kind of going to be a stepwise process. So that might not be what everybody wants to hear. We wish we could just unveil the therapy that could be available to everybody, but in reality, it's going to be a stepwise process with more and more people becoming eligible and being able to access these therapies as they come out. If I had to put a number on it, I like to think we'll see first approvals within 5 years, but don't hold me to that.
I just want to acknowledge that we had a couple questions about pumps and AIs and using AI technology to help with pre-programming basal and bolus administration, which is sort of outside the scope of tonight, but a suggestion that we will take back. Sharon, I don't want you to think that we ignored it. Bob, I saw your comment as well about your grandson being taken off the pump when he was in the hospital. So we'll take that back to be able to plan for a future session, because I will say I'm not sure how much any of us on this call right now know about any studies on adding artificial intelligence to pumps at the moment, but we will take it back and look into it and provide answers when we know, and potentially for the topic of a future presentation and webinar. But I just wanted to really thank Lara for joining in and saving the day while technology was not Sarah's friend, but also Sarah, as always, for putting together such an accessible, valuable presentation, delivering it in a way. I mean, we have people on this call who are more scientifically literate than 99% of the population, but I know they all still learn so much from both of you. So I'm really grateful to you for your time and for your presentation tonight. I also want to thank Abbott for their support of this presentation. We are recording this. It'll be sent out to everybody tomorrow. You can, I'm putting in the chat our info@breakthrough-T1D email. If there's anything that you think of that you didn't get a chance to ask now, please send it through. It'll be forwarded to either me or to Sarah Lara, and we can answer you tomorrow or in the next few days if anything else comes up. We hope you can join us for our next one in April on diabetic ketoacidosis and ketones, which will be presented by Dr. Bruce Perkins. And I just wanted to thank everybody for their time tonight and hope that you have a really good rest of your evening. Thank you again, Sarah, and thank you, Lara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.